Assalamu alaikum and good morning, my dear students. How are you all? Hope you all are doing well. So I welcome all of you to yet another class of biology. So dear children, what we learned in the previous class? We learned about, various food preservation techniques. So why we have to preserve the food items? What is the reason for preserving the food items? Yes, in order to prevent the attack of microorganisms that spoil the food items, right? And we discussed various methods for preserving the food items like chemical methods, then using salt, sugar, vinegar, oil, etc. Right? Okay. So, dear students, listen here. Have you heard about the bacteria rhizobium? Do you remember rhizobium? What is the role of rhizobium bacteria? You might have learned in the previous classes, right? Yes, rhizobium bacteria will help the plants to fix the nitrogen, right? So you know that the plants do not have the ability to absorb the nitrogen directly from the atmosphere. So this bacteria like rhizobium and some blue-green algae will help the plants to fix the nitrogen, that is to convert the atmospheric nitrogen into plant usable forms. Right. So you will be thinking that if these plants is using this nitrogen, atmospheric nitrogen, what will happen to the amount of atmospheric nitrogen? It will be decreasing. Right? You are wrong. When the plants are using this nitrogen, or when the bacteria is converting this atmospheric nitrogen into plant usable forms, likewise some amount of nitrogen is released back to the atmosphere. Okay, some amount of nitrogen is released back to the atmosphere. That means there is a circulation of nitrogen between the organisms and the atmosphere. And this circulation is called nitrogen cycle. Okay, so this nitrogen cycle will help the atmosphere to keep a balance in the amount of nitrogen. Okay, so in today's class we are going to learn in detail about the nitrogen cycle. What is nitrogen cycle? What are the different steps in the nitrogen cycle and how the nitrogen is moving in a circular motion. Okay students, so let's move into our topics. What is nitrogen cycle? The nitrogen cycle is a biogeochemical process in which nitrogen in various forms is circulated from the atmosphere to the living organisms and later it will be back into the atmosphere. As we said, living organisms require nitrogen for the synthesis of nucleic acids and proteins. The atmosphere contains almost 78% of nitrogen and it will be present in the gaseous form. This nitrogen cannot be used by the living organisms unless it is converted into ammonia, nitrates or other usable compounds of nitrogen. So the nitrogen cycle is a cyclic process where the nitrogen travels from this inorganic form in the atmosphere and to the organic way in which the living organisms can use it. Okay, so the nitrogen cycle contains several steps such as nitrogen fixation, assimilation, ammonification, nitrification and denitrification. Okay. And this cycle is essential in maintaining a proper ecological balance and is present in both marine and terrestrial ecosystems. So let's look the flow of nitrogen among the organisms and the atmosphere. So in this, as we said, there are a few steps. So first one is the nitrogen fixation. Nitrogen fixation simply means the conversion of nitrogen, atmospheric nitrogen, into a usable form of nitrogen. Here the nitrogen is converted into ammonia. Okay, during the nitrogen fixation, the atmospheric nitrogen, that is N2 form, is converted into ammonia, NH3, and this process is carried out by symbiotic bacteria present in the soil called rhizobium. Okay, So this bacterium is primarily known for its nitrogen fixation in nature. Okay, so and the nitrogen can be fixed in three different ways. First one is the atmospheric nitrogen fixation. Atmospheric nitrogen fixation means the atmospheric nitrogen can be converted into usable form at the time of lightning. Okay, during the lightning, due to the high temperature present, the nitrogen will broken down and it can be converted into different forms of usable compounds of nitrogen. Okay, this is one way of nitrogen fixation, and the other way is biological nitrogen fixation. Biological nitrogen fixation include the conversion of atmospheric nitrogen into the plant usable compounds of nitrogen by the bacteria. Okay, so we have nitrogen fixing bacteria and blue-green algae for this. Okay, so this nitrogen fixing bacteria and blue-green algae will convert the nitrogen present in the atmosphere into different compounds of nitrogen like nitrates, nitrites and all. Okay, so these are the two different methods for the nitrogen fixation. And another one is industrial nitrogen fixation that you don't have to study now. So once the nitrogen is converted into these usable compounds, it can be utilized by plants from the soil through their root system. Okay, so nitrogen is then used for the synthesis of plant proteins and other compounds, and animals feeding on plants get these proteins and other nitrogen compounds, and this step is particularly called assimilation. Here the plants and animals are using the nitrogen compounds. Okay, so this step is called assimilation. And so first step was nitrogen fixation, after that assimilation by the plants and animals. Next we have ammonification. Ammonification means when plants and animals die, bacteria and fungi present in the soil convert the nitrogenous waste into nitrogenous compounds to be used by plants again. Okay, so certain other bacteria will convert the nitrogenous waste into nitrogenous compounds after the plants and animals die. So this process is called, or this step is called ammonification. So first one was nitrogen fixation, then assimilation, then ammonification. Next we have certain other bacteria convert some part of the nitrogen into nitrogen gas, which will goes back into the atmosphere. Okay, and this process is called denitrification. So here the nitrogen compounds are converted into nitrogen gas, that is atmospheric nitrogen, and it will be released back into the atmosphere, and this process is called denitrification. And for that we have different denitrifying bacteria in the soil. Okay, so this is how the percentage of nitrogen in the atmosphere remains more or less constant even though the plants is used. Okay, so this circulation of nitrogen between organisms and the atmosphere is called the nitrogen cycle. So now I will show you a video of all process of nitrogen cycle. You have to carefully watch the video and understand the various steps involved in the nitrogen cycle. Okay.
Living organisms require nitrogen for the synthesis of proteins and nucleic acids. Atmosphere contains about 78% of nitrogen, but it cannot be utilized by living organisms unless fixed in the form of ammonia, amino acids or nitrates. The cyclic process by which nitrogen element is circulated continuously through the living and non-living components of the biosphere is called nitrogen cycle in nature. Atmosphere and water bodies contain nitrogen. Plants cannot absorb nitrogen as such, but absorb nitrogen as ammonia and nitrates. Blue-green algae and certain bacteria can fix atmospheric nitrogen into nitrates. There are three ways of nitrogen fixation. They are atmospheric nitrogen fixation, Biological nitrogen fixation. Industrial nitrogen fixation. Atmospheric nitrogen fixation. During lightning, due to high temperature, the atmospheric nitrogen reacts with oxygen and forms nitrous oxide, nitric oxide, and nitrogen peroxide. These compounds dissolve in rainwater to form dilute nitric acid. When it reaches the Earth's surface, they react with alkalis and form nitrates. Plants easily absorb nitrates. Biological fixation. Certain bacteria and blue-green algae can fix atmospheric nitrogen directly into nitrates. Nitrogen-fixing bacteria are of two types. Free-living, example Azotobacter and Clostridium. Symbiotic, example Rhizobium, present in the root nodules of certain leguminous plants. Anabaena and nostoc, algae. Industrial nitrogen fixation. Nitrogen combines with hydrogen under high pressure and high temperature to yield ammonia, Haber's process, which in turn oxidizes to form nitrates or ammonium salts. Steps involved in the process of nitrogen cycle are: atmospheric nitrogen is fixed and assimilated. Ammonification, nitrification, denitrification. Ammonification, the process of conversion of complex organic compounds into ammonia, is called ammonification. The dead remains of plants and animals and nitrogenous excretions of animals is converted into ammonia, carbon dioxide and water by the action of putrefying bacteria like actinomyces present in the soil and fungi. Nitrification, conversion of ammonia to nitrates and nitrites, is brought about by the nitrifying bacteria. Steps involved are: ammonia is oxidized to nitrites by Nitrosomonas bacteria. Nitrobacter oxidizes nitrites to nitrates. Denitrification. Bacteria Pseudomonas and Bacillus denitrificans convert nitrate to free nitrogen. This process is called denitrification. These bacteria are active only in water-logged conditions. So, rate of denitrification is less than that of nitrification. Nitrogen enters into the biotic components through plants. Plants absorb nitrates from the soil. Plants synthesize various organic compounds like proteins and amino acids which pass on to consumers via food chain. Dead plants and animals are decomposed and ammonia is released. Ammonia thus formed is converted to nitrates by nitrifying bacteria. Plants absorb a part of it and rest is liberated as free nitrogen by denitrifying bacteria.
So dear children, in today's class we learned about the nitrogen cycle, right? In that we learned about what is nitrogen fixation and which are the different steps in the nitrogen cycle, right? So I think all of you understood the topics. So if you have any doubts, we will clear it in the live section. Okay, we will meet in the next class. Thank you.